Welcome to HarmonyTALK, a podcast about dreamers and doers. Here, people from all walks of life tell us about their dreams, how they fulfilled them, and the moment they knew there was no turning back. This podcast is sponsored by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm your host, Todd Stevens. Today, I'm joined by artist Mike Geno. Some artists sculpt, others capture the human experience in portrait, even more detail fascinating landscapes. Mike is best known for cheese. That's right, he's created intricate, deceptively realistic portraits of one of the world's favorite foods. His personal connection with food and drink can literally induce a mouth-watering experience by simply viewing his work. Mike followed his passion for food and paired that with his undeniable talent for creating a lasting depiction of what we see on our plates. Snapping a picture of a meal is one of the most popular trends online today. Mike takes this concept to a whole new level. But his journey didn't start with brush in hand. As the youngest of four, he started down a more traditional path. Fortunately, a few key experiences provided a welcome diversion along the way and sent him toward his life's calling. Mike has exhibited both nationally and internationally and has been featured in the New York Times, Food Channel magazine, Culture magazine. In addition to various television and other appearances, he's also attracted the attention of the broader cheese and culinary community through his efforts to develop an even closer relationship between us and what we eat. Mike Geno, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you on the program today. And I know this podcast, Mike, is about dreamers and doers. So I have to ask, as a kid growing up in Northeast Philadelphia, did you ever dream of becoming known as one of the foremost cheese portrait artists in the world?
No, I didn't even dream of being an artist. I didn't think that was a practical idea.
When you talk about practicality, so where did it all start for you?
I had grown up and I had a good life and, I didn't suffer like artists are supposed to, according to Hollywood. I always drew as a kid, but I didn't ever have an art class. So I went to Catholic school for 12 years and I decided to take my parents' offer. I was their last chance to have someone in the family go to college. And I thought, okay, I'll apply for Penn State. That sounded reasonable and good. And I figured I might as well just start with applying as a business major because I really didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. And that seemed practical. So I applied and they said, oh, okay, but you have to go to a local campus because the main campus is already overpopulated. It's such a big major. So I went to one just outside of Philadelphia and I had a chance to maybe make my first year of college, which I heard was much harder. I thought, okay, I'll make it a little easier and I'll take a drawing class because you have to take 2 art classes as you would any other major subject. So I decided I'll get that out of the way the first year, make it a little easier transition into college. And I enjoyed it. I always liked drawing as a kid, so I thought this would be a nice blow-off course. And it turned out to be the only class I really enjoyed. And after 2 semesters of that, I found myself in a situation where I felt like I was going cold turkey. Like I'm still thinking about this all the time and I don't know what to do about it. This is weird. Why is this happening? So it kind of surprised me how much I enjoyed it and didn't pay attention to that before. So I talked to my teacher and I went back to her office one time and she was like, why don't you take painting? You could take painting with me next semester as an elective. And I'm like, okay, I might as well. There's nothing that's really exciting me anyway at this point. So I might as well just take one thing I like. And when I started painting with her, I felt like it was probably the first time I touched paint, it felt like a very strange eureka moment that I'd never had in my life. And it felt really natural to me. And I felt like I already knew how to paint, but I didn't. But I felt like I did. It was really comfortable. And by the 3rd painting, I realized I should probably become an art major. And that was probably the most risky and adventurous idea I had in my life at that point.
Sure. And your instructor, I assume, noticed a talent in you, or at least the vision of what a future could be for you working in the arts?
Yeah, fortunately. And I just had lunch with her last week. She was my very first art teacher, and she's pretty great. And she just retired from that job. She looks like she's aged about 2 years since I met her. I'm jealous, and she's a very active artist.
And can you take me back to that moment where you got that encouragement from her and that settled in with you, like you said, when you touched that paint? I mean, that must have been an amazing emotional revelation to you.
It was. I think I didn't have a very passionate experience in life until then. I felt like that changed everything. And it was still new to me. But when I told her, I think I should become an art major, she's like, why don't you go to Tyler School of Art? It's right up the street from here. It's part of Temple. It's a really good school. And I was like, oh, okay. So she showed me how to make slides of my work. This is before digital really happened in 1991. And I transferred to Tyler School of Art. And it wasn't until probably I got into grad school that I realized that my undergrad was a really great program, one of the best art schools in the country. And I took it as like, if I could get in, anyone could get in. I just felt like all schools were that quality probably, and they weren't, as it turned out.
And when you brought that news home, now you had said you were the youngest of four and your parents' last hope to get one of you to college. When you brought that news home, hey, I'm transferring out of business school and into art school, how did that go over?
Yeah, it was a little bit cliche, but not overly. I did tell my parents, I said, I need to change my majors and I'm going to probably transfer. They had gone through 2 years of really enjoying bragging rights of saying they had a business major going to Penn State and being the first in the family to go to college. This was something they had always wanted, and they were really supportive. They kind of had a slight tone of panic in their voice when I brought it up, and they were like, what are you going to do? How are you going to make a living? Because nobody knows this, and I didn't know that either. I didn't care. It was like I wanted this, and I was so miserable as a business major. And I just said, I'm going to do it. And they were like, what are you going to do? Are you going to work in advertising? And I felt like I had that sitcom voice in my head. And I'm like, sure. And in my head, I'm like, no, no, no way. But they needed to hear something. I'm like, maybe. And they're like, oh, but I don't know. Like, what are you going to do after 2 years? Because I've already paid 2 years and I offered you 4 years of tuition, which was extremely generous. I said, I'll do what anyone else did at that time and just get a loan. And I started. And for me to go to that program and start over, I transferred some credits, but it just meant I had more academic credits taken care of. So when I moved over to or into an art school, a proper one, I was able to spend more of my time making art and taking more classes that were studio-based. And probably I felt like a starving man at a buffet. It was a really amazing experience. I was pretty much on the dean's list every semester. So my parents saw the results. They saw what I made, and they never mentioned tuition again. Plus, Temple was extremely affordable. I was very fortunate.
Well, we have Temple University in common, so I agree with you. Spent a few years there myself, and I can relate. Definitely more affordable than some of the other options out there at the time. I've heard from other people that art school can be grueling, and there's a lot of learning, obviously, but you have to be pretty good at taking criticism. How did you handle that criticism, assuming you had some?
You should. If it's a decent program, you would. That wasn't a problem for me. I think because of the whole practical approach, I didn't come there thinking I was going to be a rock star. I thought I need to learn as much as I can while I can because this is so good. And I was a couple years older by this point. I think I've always benefited from being a little bit more experienced, a little bit more older than my peers sometimes. And I really appreciated this second chance. So I think I ate up everything I could get. And criticism is something I always felt like that was going to make me better. So I really welcomed it. And my teachers were great. The school lives up to its reputation. I also came from a background where it's like, I didn't know any of this. Why would I think they were wrong? Where some of my classmates, they came from an artist background. Their parents might have been artists, or they went to museums every weekend growing up, where I had never been to one until like right before art school. So I didn't have the vocabulary and that kind of pretentious approach to it. So I was happy to get criticism. It made me stronger.
It sounds like almost coming from a kind of a non-art background was almost better for you to enter art school with. An advantage, if you will.
Yeah, it was. It's probably why I worked and was focused so well. I think I didn't take anything for granted.
So you get out of art school, and obviously I mentioned in the intro that you're, well known for cheese portraits, if you will, and other culinary things, which we'll get into, but I assume you don't go right into painting food. Other things, more traditional, I assume that was your rearing, if you will, after you exit art school?
Yeah, I had an incredible BFA at Tyler, and I took a couple years off between that and grad school, and I was already working in a retail space, and I was working in the meat room as an undergrad, so it was good money, and I was cutting meat and sometimes packing meat and doing whatever the department needed. And I always looked at meat as something that would be really beautiful to photograph. I did a lot of photography when I was undergrad, but I never considered I'd paint it. And I went to Temple, Rome, which was another really important factor in my life. So like for a year or two after undergrad, I really found myself finally digesting that experience from my junior year. And I started painting from photos and working with landscape more and really pushing color and color theory that I'd always learned a lot about at Tyler. So I had a really good color theory foundation. And it was something I was passionate about too. So I was really working on experimenting with that and painting constantly while working, and then showing at a cooperative gallery to keep myself active in the community. And I didn't get into grad school right away. I got rejected from a couple places that I didn't know anything about. But I thought, oh, I'll pick places for their climate. And that turned out to be not so wise, you know. And then when I did get into grad school, it was accidental that I had found Southern Illinois University, and someone told me about it. And they're like, if you get into the graduate school, you get a full tuition waiver and they pay you to teach and they give you a big studio and you'll never paint so much in your life. And I'm like, that doesn't sound real. And I looked it up and it was. So I applied and fortunately I got in. It was such a great place for me because it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. I'm so used to being on the East Coast. And this was really farmland in Southern Illinois. And I had a great experience. I didn't expect to enjoy teaching, but that turned out to feed my passion for the fundamentals that I was teaching. The beginning of design and drawing, that kind of made me hungry to paint more. And I painted various things, like you said, but I think just as I was leaving my last semester before I finished painting my thesis show for my MFA, I had kind of joked to a friend. We were both hungry and we were out of our stipend for the month and couldn't wait for the next month to start, really, and get paid. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could just paint like a big juicy steak so I could like then eat it afterwards. I would count it as art supplies, so it wouldn't be a limit like I had on my grocery budget. And she laughed and she encouraged me to. And I'm like, oh, what the hell? I know about meat. I'm going to go to the Kroger and I'm going to ask them for their most beautiful T-bone, their most beautiful porterhouse. And I knew, though, from the meat world that you don't just say, I'm going to paint this because you'll get some crazy stares. So I said to the lady behind the counter, I'm like, I'm in an advertising class. I need to use this for a beautiful photograph. Like, what's the most beautiful porterhouse you have? She's like, oh, I know just the one. And she came back with it. And I set up my palette in my studio while it was in the fridge, staying cool. When I took it out, I worked from life because I had been doing this with objects, still life. So by going from painting toys to now I'm painting this like flesh that's like dripping a little bit. And it was so much fun. But I also had this ambition of not wasting that $10 steak. In 2001, that was a lot of money to a poor grad student, really. So I was like, I need to be able to eat this. So it forced me to paint it much faster and not think about it too much. So I had gone kind of on my instincts and my intuition, and all the experience from my 3 years in grad school kind of came together, and I just focused. And I was in this zone, and I quickly put it back in the fridge after I was finished, and I ate that night, and it was wonderful. But after that, nobody wanted to talk about my toy paintings that I had been building a series of. They just wanted to talk about this one. They noticed something that was more passionate maybe in it, the way it came out, the level of success or interest for me was obviously apparent in the paint. And that my peers and the faculty, they all were like, no, this means more to you. And that's why this is such a better painting. We could see it. And it was another eureka moment, like, oh. So I had like a month and a half left and I'm like, okay, I continued finishing my toy series. And then I started doing a series of meat paintings at the same time. And so I had them both in my exhibit for my thesis. And so I left grad school with this very successful series of raw meat, various cuts and types. And it was such a great way to end my education in a way, because I had this like extremely successful portfolio that turned out to be extremely popular at that time, coinciding with trends. In 2001, there was this new trend towards meat and bacon. It became trendy. I mean, you would go to the store and there's like bacon shower curtains, there's bacon pajamas at Target, like just coincided with the fact that I had done that. And I had gotten a lot of press from that. And it really started my post education life really well.
Well, and I hope our listeners, when you're driving down the road listening to this podcast, obviously you're not going to be able to see it, but YouTube versions, you'll be able to see some of Mike's work. And also, we'll talk about MikeGeno.com in a few minutes as well. But the one painting that I was thinking of yours when you're talking is a sirloin. And if you're looking at a menu or at a restaurant where they actually display the steaks, I mean, this is a picture perfect replica of a sirloin. But the thing I'm curious about more is that you had a passion for this and a connection. Did you not realize you had that passion until you made the work and saw others' reactions to it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's amazing how ignorant I was. I think that's part of being an artist. You're constantly learning about yourself, and I'm not, I guess, over focused on myself a lot. So I'm just enjoying and learning about paint and whatever. And then, when you do get those critiques, another reason to really welcome a critique is that that's when you find out more about yourself, because you have objective points of view, revealing yourself. It's kind of great.
That's fascinating. I don't want to jump too far ahead of ourselves, but I have to ask, I know there's a story about a gift card that you once had, and I want to know more about how you go from meat and toy collection and other items to cheese, because also, as I mentioned at the top, you are known as the foremost cheese portrait artist, perhaps in the world, Mike, and not only your work, but also your knowledge of cheese. So how did that all come about?
Well, I guess returning back to Philadelphia and really starting to enjoy food thoroughly, and I never really had that opportunity to think about food the way I started to then. And the city was really, exploding with the culinary scene and national recognition. And I was really immersed in that. And I loved living in Philadelphia while this was just happening. And my knowledge was really limited. I was painting a lot of local food because I really missed them. And when I came back, this became obvious that I should be painting pretzels, soft pretzels from Philadelphia, or hoagies or things like that. And then I think when I turned 40, someone came to my dinner I had and gave me a gift card for De Bruno Brothers, which is a pretty iconic cheese shop in the US even, but definitely for Philadelphia. It's really old and it's got a great reputation. And I knew about it, even though I knew nothing about cheese. And so I had that for a while and I thought, I should just get around to just using this. It's $25. I've never spent that kind of money on cheese. I don't know what to do. So I went to their Italian market store, their original store, and I'm like, okay, I have a gift certificate. I don't know what to do with it. What should I get? And they're like, what do you like to eat? What kind of flavors do you like? I had never experienced the cheesemonger before. And I don't think most Americans have. This is just something you can take for granted if you live in that neighborhood or you go to a cheese shop in your hometown. But I think the majority of Americans at that point, especially, this was probably 2010. And the first one that really made sense to me, I was like, yes, I want that. And he's like, how much? And I'm like, oh, $25 worth. I went home with this wedge of cheese. And the thing is, I had been taking a year off of painting. I was really frustrated with the crash of 2008 and 9. And I had a huge show of small food art and small paintings of food. And hardly anything sold in the show because the crash of the market right before Christmas, right before that show. And I had so many paintings in storage. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do some drawings. So I started doing these bacon drawings for myself, thinking no one will ever want these probably, but they were fun. But here I was in the middle of the year and I'm looking at this wedge of cheese and I'm like, I can't just eat this. It's too pretty. It's gorgeous. It makes me want to paint. So I painted it like I do a lot of things, or I had already by that point, and I painted it the way I wanted to devour it. It went really easily and it came out nicely. And then it sat on my wall by itself because of the drawings were taking up my space, and I didn't have any other paintings on my wall in my studio. And then I was lucky enough one day later that year to meet this woman at a food party, like a food potluck party. She was incredibly easy to talk to. We hit it off really well. And she said that she wrote about cheese. She was a professor, but she had a blog called Madame Fromage. And I thought that was extraordinary. I had never heard of such a thing. And it was great. And then, a couple months later, I realized my deadline for my next show was coming up and I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do. I was asked a year earlier to do a show of just small paintings, but it has to be food of some sort that they hadn't shown already. And I thought, well, I could do this, I could do that. And I kept looking at that painting of cheese and I'm like, well, I don't know anything about cheese. How could I do that? And then I thought, wait, I'll look that lady up. Luckily, her website was really easy to find. And I sent her that image and in a message. And I said, hey, I'm looking to make a small series. Is there any advice you have? And she saw the image and she immediately said, you need to come over to my house tonight. I have this rare cheese from the Northwest that is never going to be made again by this iconic cheese-making woman who was a pioneer in the industry, and she was retiring, and this was the last wheel she would ever get. And she gave me the last half of it, and she ignited all this interest. She started explaining the history of this cheese, the name of the animal that the milk came from, the story of this lady that was dramatic. And then she started giving me other cheeses and having me pair it with things. It was like this crash course. The passion Tanaya had was so infectious. I left there and she gave me 3 cheeses to paint. And she's like, go. It's okay. I don't need them. I already wrote about them. And I felt really guilty for taking them because I thought these are expensive. So after I painted them, I thought I should send her, an invite, let her see the paintings. She came over and started photographing them and asked to put them on her blog. And I'm like, sure, no big deal. And then we became really good friends and we started venturing into the city cheese shops together. She started introducing me to mongers and even makers sometimes. And this was like this incredible, unexpected education I got. And the mongers at the Brunos are so knowledgeable that you learn a lot about the cheese and the farm and the animals and the story behind it. And I didn't realize there was a story until then. And that just made me more engaged. Like the meat was compared to inanimate objects. There's something about cheese that was really alive, something I've learned since then, and the history that came with it. So I started this series and I was in the beginning like, is there even like 20, 25 cheeses to paint? Like, I don't know. And I got them done. And at this point, I don't know, 14 years later, I'm getting close to 500 cheese paintings.
Oh my gosh. Would you say you didn't know there were that many cheeses even back then? That blows my mind a little bit too, because I'm a lover of cheese as well. And I've seen a lot of your work with cheese. And, what is it about our fascination with cheese? Is it that backstory? Is it an American staple? I guess you could look at it from a number of different standpoints, but what is it about cheese?
I think for me, it's really attractive the way it appears. I find it is probably widely acceptable compared to meat, for instance. There's always politics involved with certain foods, but something about cheese is the most approachable. The widest audience really enjoys it. And the way in which that I like to use paint and accentuate texture along with color and value, that really gives me the opportunity to reproduce that texture of the cheese. So when I'm painting, I'm actually translating it almost physically into a work of art that's really textural and colorful. So the presence of the subject, I'm trying to recreate that thing I want to bite into.
No, I absolutely do. And that connection with the food, I think, is what, resonates with me when I hear you talk too. And obviously you have that passion for that. I've got lots more questions, Mike, but I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit if I could ask you a few about, your path and what you might recommend to other people who may be, in a similar situation. Do you have any advice for people who are pursuing their passion and trying to do it full time?
Yeah, don't expect it to happen overnight. I didn't expect it to happen at all. And maybe that was why it was healthier. It's just like when I started art school, I didn't really expect to get here. I just knew I was doing it for the right reason, which was because I really had a passion for it. I didn't think I was going to ever make a living as a painter. I thought once I got into grad school, I discovered I really enjoyed teaching also. So teaching was going to accommodate my lifestyle as an artist. It was going to let me not work at an office. So finding more than one paths that kind of support each other maybe is a great way of getting to a place that makes sense for you. The chance to be around your subject or your field, if you're teaching, for instance, not everyone that teaches becomes a professional artist or a full-time artist. And I certainly didn't plan to or expect to, at least. And it was something that with what's happened, getting exposure from the New York Times, it meant that my audience grew tremendously because of that venue. And then after the Times, I was in dozens and dozens of media interviews because of it. Everyone sees that. And it expanded my coverage. It meant that more people knew about my work, and the more people know about your work, the more you can live off of it, and more people who were willing to pay for art and love your subject. That really helps. And I got really, fortunate to have this perfect Venn diagram of like cheese and art. People who really like artisanal cheese also really appreciate art. And the people who like meat don't necessarily buy art, but the people who buy artisanal cheese do. And that was also helpful. But I think I hustled for years, for more than a decade before I had this break. I was selling things on Etsy. I was making things that I could sell on eBay, and I was teaching as an adjunct, and I'm still teaching as an adjunct to a point. So like I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was able to have the time to make my art. And I wasn't ashamed of selling prints of stuff. I would make a print of a painting that I sold, and I could sell it for $25 on Etsy, and that would make me some food money. I didn't expect to sell, for great amounts of money. It kind of became my income later just by working in so many different directions.
You mentioned teaching, and, I think it's so important that particularly young people listening understand that there is a process. Does teaching keep you connected to that younger self, if you will? And do you reflect back on those moments when you were going through school as you act as an instructor?
Yeah, totally. I feel like when I started teaching in grad school, I had never taught before. I wasn't taught how to teach, but I thought, okay, let's just think about this. I had this really great experience as a freshman, and here I am teaching freshmen. I know how to do this. I went through it. So I really was fortunate to have such a good foundation program to refer to when I taught foundation classes. I realized that's what I loved, because that was the moment my life changed with foundation year, which is the first year of art school. It teaches you how to do everything you basically need in order to go into any major within art school. So it was really great for me. And so I love teaching it because you get this group of students that are fresh, clean slate, a little less of an idea of what they want. So they're open-minded a little bit more. I always refer to, in my head at least, what I went through, what my best teachers did, and how my least, helpful experiences I'm trying to avoid, So when I teach even now, I really enjoy the energy of that. I tap into that passion I always had. And I think it's important for me to be honest with my students. So I'm like, this is why I'm doing this. This is why you're going to be doing this, because it's going to make a difference in you succeeding and you being a better artist or designer. And so when I teach, I try to remember to tell my students why they're doing it and why this specific thing isn't just filling time. It's actually going to make them better. And I think my students start to listen more when I give them that context, because I had teachers that didn't tell me, and I would do stuff because I felt like, we're just doing something in class because they need to fill time. And I didn't try as hard because I didn't know how important it was. So some of the things that I could have done better in freshman year, I'm trying to explain this all to my students that I could have been better, and I want them to learn from that. So I love tapping into that. But also, it's talking about color and form and all the things that I apply in my art. It just makes me excited about it. So it makes me want to go to my studio and paint.
Well, when I was watching one of your examples of you painting sped up a little bit, you mentioned about context and structure and color. You started with a very dark color, and the painting that you ultimately had completed was a very light colored cheese. And I had seen the painting, and then I saw the creation of it, and I was asking myself, why in the world would you start with a base color like that? But I think what you're saying is, those fundamentals, the foundation, what things might be considered to be killing time, if you will, really have a purpose and a meaning.
I guess I can't think of which one you're talking about, but I try to use a more transparent pigment to start with just to get my structure in. I don't sketch really. I don't do underpaintings. I do a couple light lines and I get the shape and the position, everything that I want right really quickly and without overthinking it. And then I start laying in the paint and I build it really. So I just jump in. I've painted so much that it would take me longer to draw it than to paint it.
Well, again, I love your work. I mean, if our listeners would like to take a look, I mentioned the sirloin, some of my other favorites of yours, the ciabatta, again, mouthwatering painting. I think we share a similar favorite drink, Manhattan. You also paint cocktails. I've seen your work, the Manhattan, the old-fashioned, very intricate stuff, and sushi was another one that caught my eye. I was searching for an example, since you are from Philadelphia, of the most famous cheese in Philadelphia, Whiz, right? I did find it in a painting that you did of a cheesesteak. So it was quite some time ago. But being from Philly, Pat's, Geno's, Jim's, D'Alessandro's, do you have a favorite?
I stay away from the first two because in my opinion, they're a bit of a tourist trap. To be honest, there's a lot of great cheesesteaks in Philly. It's so important to this place that we have them everywhere. Instead of going to Pat's and Geno's, I think you'd be better off in a neighborhood place. The one that I end up painting was late in my series of local food. I was interviewed so many times and people were asking, well, when are you going to do a cheesesteak? And I'm like, I've had a hard time because I work from life and it's going to be hard to sit in front of a freshly made cheesesteak and not eat it.
I can relate to that.
This place opened up in my neighborhood, so it was close to my studio. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to go for a really early lunch. And if it's good, I'm taking another one right to my studio. And it was great. So I told them, could you please do another one like this, but don't wrap it up. I want to carry it open so I can get it to my studio. And it was great. I had so much fun with it. So I'm glad I got that out of the way.
Absolutely. So, Mike, from what I hear, your work is available not only for purchase, but also in different forms, including a calendar, again, featuring your work. And I understand there's also been Christmas tree ornaments made out of your work, which is fascinating to me. Where do you go from here? What's next?
That's a question for sure. I don't know the answer to that. And I think that I never knew the answer to that. And that's probably why it works. So I'm not going to overfocus on it. I think I try to keep my mind open. Some people said, how long can you paint cheese? And I'm like, I don't know. It hasn't gotten boring yet. But I do break into, that's why I started painting cocktails. I really do enjoy them. And I realized I might as well paint what I enjoy. And that's how I got into all this, right? So the cocktail series is relatively new. It's obviously pretty popular. I'll do more, of course. But I think what happens is going to happen naturally and not be pre-planned. I don't think planning it is going to work for me. It can't be genuine if it is.
Well, that real connection to your work definitely comes through to the audience. So kudos to you on that, because I can certainly relate to that. And I have to say, Mike, it's been a real pleasure talking with you today. Thanks for being on the program. Where can listeners find you?
Well, it's easy to find me online. My website is just my name. It's pretty easy. If you Google Mike Geno and cheese, you can't miss me. Or just cheese art, you'll find me. But also, besides my website at mikegeno.com, you can see a lot of my work on Instagram, which is just Mike Geno Studio. So it gives a pretty good open studio tour. I use that as a main platform where people can see what's going on in my studio. And it usually means they know when to maybe visit my website if they want to get something.
Absolutely. Do you offer studio tours?
Yeah. I have a really great little studio in the Fishtown area, which is pretty amazing just for eating anyway. If people reach out to me, I'm happy to meet them at my studio. They can see work in person if they'd like. I'm always happy to have that. I have a lot of work on the wall, and it's really fun to be in it, the presence of all of it at once. I don't work at home, and it's really nice to have a place I can sit and just look at a wall of cheese. It's kind of fun.
Well, I'm hungry right now just talking about it. So, Mike, it's really been a pleasure. We've been talking with Mike Geno, renowned portrait artist, best known for his work with cheese. Don't forget to check out MikeGeno.com. That's Geno, by the way, to learn more and maybe pick up one of Mike's originals or prints. Mike, again, thanks for being on the program today.
Thank you. It was fun.
This is Harmony Talk Podcast presented by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm Todd Stevens. For everyone out there, keep dreaming and doing.